Somewhere, right now, someone is trying to get a reaction out of you. A comment designed to sting. A tone of voice meant to needle you. A silence meant to make you sweat. And here's the strange truth almost nobody tells you. The moment you react, you hand that person the one thing they wanted most: control over your mind. The ancient Stoics knew this 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man on earth, wrote himself private notes reminding him not to become what angered him. Epictetus, a man born into slavery, discovered a freedom that no chain could touch. And today I'm going to give you 7 rules, battle-tested across 2 millennia, that will make you nearly impossible to provoke. By the end of this video, the people who used to control your emotions will have absolutely nothing left to pull. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the home for those who refuse to be ruled by chaos, weakness, or the opinions of others. Here we take the timeless teachings of Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus and turn them into practical armor for modern life. If you're new here, consider hitting subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't just philosophy, it's a survival manual for your peace of mind. Now let's begin. Picture this. You're having a completely normal day. Then someone says something, maybe cruel, maybe just careless, and within seconds, your heart rate spikes, your jaw tightens, and your entire mood is hijacked. The rest of your day is spent replaying the moment, rehearsing comebacks you'll never say, feeling the sting long after the person who caused it has already forgotten. Sound familiar? This is what the Stoics called being led by invisible strings. Someone else pulls and you move. They insult and you seethe. They mock and you retaliate. They ignore you and you spiral into anxiety. In every case, the puppeteer isn't controlling your body. They're controlling your mind. And the wildest part is, most people never even notice the strings are there. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire that stretched across 3 continents. Wars, betrayals, plagues, family tragedy. He faced provocation on a scale most of us will never know. Yet in his private journal, meant for no one's eyes but his own, he wrote reminders to himself about not letting other people's cruelty become a mirror for his own. Seneca, advisor to a genuinely unstable emperor, lived every single day with people who could have him killed on a whim, and still cultivated a mind so calm it became legendary. Epictetus was enslaved, his leg reportedly broken by a master's cruelty, and from that suffering he built a philosophy so powerful that it eventually taught Roman senators and emperors how to think. If these men, under infinitely worse provocation than a rude comment or a passive-aggressive co-worker, could master their reactions, then so can you. Not through suppression, not through pretending you don't feel anything, but through a complete rewiring of how you relate to provocation itself. Here's what makes this video different from generic advice you've heard 1,000 times. We're not talking about just ignore it or don't let it bother you. Those phrases are useless because they don't tell you how. Today you're getting 7 specific, actionable Stoic rules. The actual mental techniques used by people who trained their minds like weapons for peace instead of war. Stay with me until the end, because rule number 5 is the one that changes everything, about how you see rude people forever. And the final rule is the one Marcus Aurelius used on his deathbed. Let's talk about why provocation works on us in the first place. Section 1. Why provocation has power over you. Before we get to the rules, you need to understand the mechanism. Because if you don't understand why you get hooked, you'll keep getting hooked no matter how many quotes you memorize. Here is the core Stoic insight, and I want you to really sit with this one. It is never the insult itself that disturbs you. It is your judgment about the insult. Let that land for a second. The words someone says are just vibrations of air or pixels on a screen. They have no power on their own. A word in a language you don't speak could be the cruelest insult imaginable, and it would land on you like rain on a rock, completely harmless, because you assign it no meaning. But the same insult in your native language, from someone you respect, on a day you're already exhausted. That one goes straight to the heart. The difference isn't the insult. The difference is the meaning you attach to it. This is what Epictetus meant when he said that people are disturbed not by things, but by their opinions about things. Read that twice. It sounds almost too simple to be profound, but it is the single most liberating idea in all of Stoic philosophy. If your suffering comes from your judgment, and your judgment is something you control, then no one, not your boss, not your ex, not a stranger online, can actually reach in and disturb your peace without your permission. Now I know what some of you are thinking. That sounds nice, Claude. I mean, that sounds nice in theory, but when someone insults me, I don't get a say in the matter. My body just reacts. And you're right, partially. There is an automatic physiological response, a flinch, a flash of heat in your chest, an involuntary tightening. The Stoics knew this too. They called these first movements propatei, and they didn't blame you for having them. Your nervous system evolved over millions of years to detect threats instantly, before your conscious mind even wakes up to what's happening. But here's the crucial distinction. The first flinch is not in your control. What happens in the next 3 seconds absolutely is. Between the provocation and your response, there is a gap. It might only last a heartbeat, but it's real and it's yours. In that gap lives your entire freedom. Widen that gap, and you become ungovernable by other people's cruelty. Ignore that gap, and you remain a puppet for the rest of your life, reacting to every jab, every slight, every provocation like a dog chasing every stick thrown in its direction. The 7 rules you're about to learn are, in essence, 7 different techniques for widening that gap. Some work on your perception before the provocation even happens. Some work in the split second during the provocation, and some work afterward, so the sting doesn't linger for hours or days. Let's start with the first rule, and it's one that most people get completely backward. Rule 1. Separate what is yours from what is theirs. The first rule is the foundation everything else is built on. The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control, and it is, without exaggeration, one of the most powerful ideas a human being can internalize. Here is the rule in its simplest form. Some things are within your power, and some things are not. Your judgments, your intentions, your desires, your reactions, these are yours, completely and entirely. Other people's opinions, their moods, their behavior, what they say about you behind your back or to your face, none of that is yours. It never was. Now here's where it gets practical. When someone provokes you, they are offering you something. A comment, a tone, an insult. That offering belongs to them. It was created in their mind, shaped by their own insecurities, their own bad day, their own unresolved anger. The moment it leaves their mouth, you have a choice. Accept it or let it pass by. Picture a courier trying to hand you a package you never ordered. You didn't ask for it. You don't want it. So why would you sign for it, carry it home, unwrap it, and let its contents rearrange your furniture? That's exactly what happens when you absorb someone's provocation as if it's your problem to solve emotionally. Their rudeness is their package. Your peace is your house. You get to decide what crosses the threshold. Epictetus used to teach this with a brutally simple example. He said if someone tells you your head is oddly shaped, you laugh because you know it isn't true. But if someone criticizes something you actually believe about yourself, something you haven't examined, something you've quietly agreed might be true, that's when it stings. In other words, the insult only has power over the ground you've already conceded in your own mind. This is why the exact same comment can devastate one person and bounce off another, like it was nothing. It's not about thickness of skin, it's about ownership. The person with a wide dichotomy of control has already decided, ahead of time, which parts of their identity are up for public debate and which parts are settled, permanent, theirs alone. Let me give you a modern example. Imagine you post something online that you worked hard on, and a stranger leaves a cutting, dismissive comment. 2 people receive the exact same words. Person 1 spends the entire day refreshing the comment section, composing responses in the shower, losing sleep. Person 2 reads it once, feels a small flicker of irritation, and returns to their day within minutes. What's the difference? Person 2 has already internalized, "This comment is not mine to carry. It came from someone I've never met, whose life I know nothing about, whose motivations are theirs and theirs alone. I did not write those words. I do not have to live inside them." Marcus Aurelius, ruling from the frontier of the empire while barbarian tribes threatened invasion, while senators plotted behind his back, while his own body was racked with illness, wrote to himself constantly about this exact discipline. He reminded himself again and again that other people's wrongdoing belongs to them. It is their business, their soul, their responsibility before whatever gods they answer to. His job was not to fix their character. His job was to protect his own. Here's your practical exercise for this rule, and I want you to actually try this the next time someone provokes you. In that split-second gap we talked about earlier, silently ask yourself one question: whose problem is this? If the provocation reveals something true and useful about you, a blind spot, a flaw worth working on, then it's partly yours, and you can thank them, however reluctantly, for the mirror. But if it's simply an attack, a projection, a bad mood looking for a target, it's theirs. Let them keep it. This single distinction, practiced daily, will do more for your peace of mind than almost anything else in this video. But it's only the first rule. The second rule builds directly on top of it, and it involves something the Stoics practiced. That sounds strange at first, until you understand why it works. If you're finding this valuable so far, drop a comment below, telling me which provocation in your own life you're going to apply this rule to. Writing it down, even in a YouTube comment, makes the lesson stick. Now let's move to Rule 2. Rule 2. Rehearse the insult before it arrives. Here's a question. Why does a punch you see coming hurt less psychologically than a punch that catches you completely off guard? Because you braced for it. Your mind had already processed the possibility before your body absorbed the impact. The Stoics applied this exact principle to insults, criticism, and betrayal. It's called premeditatio, malorum, the premeditation of adversity. And while it's usually taught in the context of tragedy and loss, it applies just as powerfully to provocation. Seneca advised his friends to mentally rehearse difficult scenarios before they happened. Not to become paranoid or pessimistic, but to strip future events of their power to shock. If you've already imagined calmly and rationally that a co-worker might mock your idea in the meeting, and it happens, it doesn't land as a shock. It lands as confirmation of something you'd already made peace with. This is completely different from anxious worrying, and I want to be very clear about that distinction because it's important. Anxious worrying is frantic, repetitive, emotionally charged. It's your mind spinning uselessly, imagining catastrophe without any resolution. Stoic premeditation is calm, deliberate, and brief. You spend 30 seconds imagining the worst version of a conversation. You remind yourself that you would survive it, that your character would remain intact regardless of what was said, and then you move on with your day, armored rather than anxious. Here's how to actually use this. Before a situation where you expect provocation, a difficult family gathering, a tense work meeting, a conversation with someone who has a habit of pushing your buttons, before you walk in, take 30 seconds. Picture the worst comment they might make. Really hear it in your mind. Then ask yourself, if they said that exact thing, would my character be damaged? Would my worth as a person actually change? The answer every single time is no. Their words can wound your pride for a moment, but they cannot touch the actual substance of who you are, unless you let them. Marcus Aurelius began his mornings this way. He would remind himself that today he would meet people who were interfering, ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, and unsociable. Not because he expected the absolute worst from everyone, but because he refused to be surprised by human nature. He'd already made peace with the fact that some people, on some days, would be difficult. And so when it happened, it didn't destabilize him. It confirmed what he already knew about the world, and had already prepared his mind to Handle with grace. There's something profoundly freeing in this. Most of our emotional devastation comes not from the provocation itself, but from the shock of it, the feeling of, how dare they? Or, I can't believe this is happening to me. Premeditation removes the shock, and without shock, an insult is just words. Uncomfortable, maybe, but not devastating. Try this exercise this week. Before any interaction you suspect might be difficult, spend 30 seconds, no more, imagining the toughest thing that could be said to you, and reminding yourself that your character remains yours regardless. You'll walk into that room a different person, calmer, steadier, almost unshakable. Now let's move to the third rule, which deals with something even more insidious than a direct insult, the slow burn of resentment that builds when we replay provocations over and over in our minds. Rule 3. Starve the replay. Here's an uncomfortable truth. The initial provocation usually lasts about 5 seconds. A sharp comment, a dismissive gesture, a cruel remark. It happens fast, and then it's over. But for most of us, the actual suffering lasts for hours, sometimes days, sometimes years. Why? Because we replay it over and over. In the shower, in the car, lying awake at 2 a.m. We run the scene again, adding new comebacks, imagining better responses, reliving the sting each time as if it were happening fresh. Here's the brutal math the Stoics understood. The person who provoked you gets to hurt you once, but every time you replay it in your mind, you are hurting yourself all over again, for free, without them even being present. You've become your own tormentor, doing their work for them long after they've walked away and forgotten the whole thing ever happened. Marcus Aurelius wrote something remarkable on this subject. He noted that we often suffer more in our imagination than we do in reality, that the anticipation and the rumination of pain are frequently worse than the pain itself. This applies perfectly to emotional provocation. The insult itself might genuinely only cause a flicker of discomfort. It's the 8 replays over the following 3 days that turn a flicker into a wildfire. So how do you actually stop the replay? This is where practical technique matters more than pure philosophy. Here are 3 specific tools the Stoics essentially pioneered, phrased in modern usable terms. First, name the loop when it starts. The moment you notice you're replaying a provocation for the 3rd or 4th time, say to yourself internally, I am rehearsing suffering that has already ended. This single sentence interrupts the automatic nature of rumination. It takes something unconscious and drags it into conscious awareness, where you actually have power over it. Second, ask what the replay is costing you. Every minute spent reliving an insult is a minute not spent on your work, your relationships, your actual life. The Stoics were relentlessly practical about time because they understood, correctly, that it's the only truly non-renewable resource we have. Seneca wrote extensively about how people guard their money and possessions fiercely, yet hand over their time, the most valuable thing they own, to anyone who asks for it, including, ironically, to people who've already wronged them and aren't even around to see the damage they're still causing. Third, replace the loop with a physical anchor. This one is less philosophical and more practical psychology, but it works remarkably well alongside Stoic principles. When you catch yourself replaying a provocation, physically stand up, take 3 deep breaths, and redirect your attention to a task requiring your hands, writing, cleaning, walking. The goal isn't distraction for its own sake, it's breaking the neurological groove that rumination carves into your brain the more you use it. Here's something important to understand. Every time you replay a painful moment without resolving it, you're not processing it, you're rehearsing it. Processing means examining a hurt once, extracting whatever lesson exists in it and setting it down. Rehearsing means running the exact same emotional loop repeatedly without any new insight, just fresh pain layered onto old pain. Think about the people in your life who provoke you the most. If you're honest with yourself, how much of the pain they cause you happens in the actual moment, versus how much happens afterward, in your own head, on your own time, completely unprompted by anything they're currently doing. For most people, the ratio is shocking. Maybe 5% of the suffering happens live. The other 95% is self-inflicted rehearsal. This is genuinely one of the most liberating realizations you can have. It means the majority of your suffering from provocation is within your control to simply stop generating. Not by suppressing the memory, not by pretending it didn't happen, but by refusing to hand it your attention over and over again for free. Let's talk about Rule 4, which shifts our focus from what happens inside your mind to something the Stoics believed about the people who provoke you in the first place, a perspective shift so powerful it can turn rage into something closer to compassion. Before we continue, if this video is helping you see provocation differently, take 2 seconds to hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear this exact message today. Rule 4. Understand that cruelty is a symptom. Here's a perspective that changed how I think about difficult people entirely. And it comes straight from Marcus Aurelius's personal notebook. He wrote, in essence, that no one does wrong on purpose, that everyone acts according to what they believe, in that moment, to be good or beneficial to them, even when their actions are cruel, twisted, or self-serving. This sounds almost absurd at first. Surely some people are just cruel, right? Surely some people know exactly what they're doing when they hurt others. But the Stoics weren't naive about human nature. They were making a much sharper point. They argued that people who cause harm are, in a very real sense, suffering from a kind of internal sickness. A person operating from genuine peace, security, and self-respect does not need to tear others down. The impulse to provoke, mock, belittle, or attack almost always comes from somewhere wounded. Insecurity, fear, envy, unresolved pain that's looking for an outlet. This doesn't excuse cruelty. Let me be extremely clear about that, because I don't want this rule misunderstood. The Stoics were not telling people to tolerate abuse or stay in harmful situations. Many of them were quite firm about removing themselves from genuinely toxic people and setting real boundaries. But there is a difference between excusing someone's behavior and understanding it. Understanding doesn't mean permission. It means insight. And insight is what protects your peace. Here's why this matters practically. When someone provokes you and you assume they're doing it out of pure malice, targeted specifically and uniquely at you, it feels personal, and personal wounds cut deep. But when you recognize that this person is likely acting out of their own insecurity, their own unresolved history, their own bad relationship with themselves, the provocation starts to look less like an attack on you and more like a symptom of something happening inside them, something that has very little to do with you at all. Think about the last time someone snapped at you unfairly. Now ask yourself honestly, is it more likely that this person has spent years meticulously plotting your downfall, or that they were stressed, hurting, insecure, or simply repeating a pattern they learned somewhere in their own past and never examined? Almost always it's the latter. You just happened to be standing nearby when the pressure came out. Epictetus used a metaphor that I find genuinely useful here. He compared a person who insults you to a dog that barks at every passerby. You don't take the barking personally because you understand it's simply what an anxious, untrained dog does. It has nothing to do with your worth as a person walking by. Now, I'm not comparing people to dogs to be dismissive of them. The Stoics deeply valued human dignity and believed every person had access to reason and virtue. The point of the metaphor is different. It's that reactive, provocative behavior often comes from a place of poor training, poor internal governance, unresolved pain, not from some accurate verdict on your character. This reframe changes everything about how a provocation lands. Instead of thinking, why does this person hate me? You start thinking, this person is clearly struggling with something, and I happen to be the target. Today, one thought spirals you into self-doubt and anger. The other generates something closer to a strange, calm compassion, the kind that lets you set a boundary firmly, without carrying the emotional wreckage home with you. Here's a practical technique. The next time someone provokes you, silently ask, what kind of pain would make someone need to say that? You don't need the answer to be accurate. You don't need to actually diagnose the person's psychology. The value of the question is that it shifts your attention away from your own wounded pride and toward a more spacious, less personal understanding of what's happening. It's remarkably hard to stay furious at someone while genuinely wondering what's broken inside them that makes cruelty feel necessary. Seneca lived among some of the most genuinely dangerous, unstable people in Roman history. An imperial court filled with paranoia, jealousy, and real physical danger. And yet his writings on anger are some of the calmest, most compassionate texts to survive from antiquity. He argued that anger is essentially a form of temporary madness, and that the angry person is more to be pitied than feared, because they've handed away their own reason for the sake of a fleeting satisfaction. That solves nothing. Now here's where Rule 4 connects directly to Rule 5, because understanding that provocation is a symptom naturally leads to the next question. If you're not going to react with anger, what should you actually do in the moment? This is where most people get completely stuck, and it's where the fifth rule gives you something genuinely actionable. Rule 5, the silent pause that ends the fight. I said earlier this rule would change everything, and I mean that. This is the single most practical, immediately usable tool in the entire video. Here it is. In the moment you feel provoked, before you speak, before you react, pause for a count of 3 breaths. Not a dramatic pause. Not a passive-aggressive silence meant to punish the other person. A genuine internal pause where you simply breathe and let the initial flash of emotion pass through you without acting on it. Why 3 breaths? Because physiologically, the surge of stress hormones that floods your body during a provocation, adrenaline, cortisol, peaks and begins to subside within roughly 90 seconds if you don't feed it with more reactive thoughts. 3 slow breaths take you roughly 15 to 20 seconds, which is enough time to move from the reactive, animal part of your brain back into the reasoning part. It's not magic. It's neuroscience the Stoics stumbled onto through pure observation, 2,000 years before anyone had the vocabulary of the nervous system. Here's why this single pause is so devastatingly effective against people who try to provoke you. Provocation almost always seeks an immediate reaction. The person needling you wants to see the flinch, hear the sharp retort, watch you lose composure, because your reaction is the proof. They're looking for that. They have power over you. When you pause instead, you deny them the exact thing they came for. Not through icy silence or dramatic eye-rolling, but through genuine centered calm. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this precise technique, though in different language. He reminded himself that when disturbed by an external event, it isn't the event itself that's the problem. It's his own judgment about it, and that judgment can be revised or withdrawn at any moment he chooses. The pause is where that revision happens. It's the physical space where you get to ask yourself the questions from the earlier rules. Whose problem is this? What pain is behind this? Is my character actually at risk? Before you let any of it out of your mouth. Let me give you an extremely practical version of this you can use starting today. When someone says something provoking, internally count 1, 2, 3, inhaling on 1, holding on 2, exhaling slowly on 3. During that count, silently ask yourself just one question. What response would I be proud of in an hour? Not what response would feel most satisfying in the next 5 seconds, because satisfying, in-the-moment responses are almost always the ones we regret later. What would you be proud of in an hour tomorrow next week? This single question does an enormous amount of work. It pulls your perspective out of the emotionally flooded present moment and into a slightly wiser, slightly more distant vantage point, closer to how you'll actually feel once the adrenaline has faded. 9 times out of 10, the answer isn't the cutting comeback. It's the calm, measured response. or sometimes remarkably no response at all. There's a story, likely apocryphal but instructive, about Socrates, a philosophical ancestor to the Stoics, being asked why he didn't respond when a man struck him in public. He reportedly said that if a donkey had kicked him, he wouldn't feel the need to kick it back. The point isn't that the person provoking you is subhuman or unworthy of a response. The point is that not every provocation requires an equal and opposite reaction. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply choosing deliberately not to engage on the terms the other person set. I want to be very clear that this is not about becoming passive or letting people walk over you. There is an enormous difference between the calm, deliberate choice to not react in a heated moment and simply swallowing mistreatment out of fear or people-pleasing. The pause isn't the end of the process. It's the beginning. After the pause, you might choose to address the issue directly, calmly and firmly. You might set a clear boundary. You might walk away entirely. But whatever you choose, you're choosing it from a place of reasoned clarity rather than reactive heat. And that distinction changes the entire outcome of the interaction. Here's something worth trying this week as a direct exercise. Pick one relationship in your life where you know provocation is likely, a specific person, a specific dynamic. The next time it happens, commit right now to using the 3-breath pause before you respond in any way. Notice what happens. Notice how the other person reacts when their bait goes unanswered by panic. More often than not, provocation that meets calm, measured silence simply deflates. There's nothing for it to grab onto. If you've made it this far in the video, I'd genuinely love to know in the comments, which of these 5 rules do you think will be hardest for you to actually practice? Understanding a rule intellectually and living it. Under real pressure are 2 very different things, and naming your specific challenge is often the first step toward actually overcoming it. Now let's move into the 6th rule, which deals with something almost nobody talks about. How to handle provocation that comes not from strangers, but from people you love. Rule 6. Guard the inner citadel. Here's a truth that makes provocation so much harder to deal with in real life. The people who can hurt you the most are rarely strangers. It's family. It's close friends. It's the people whose opinions you actually care about, whose approval you've always wanted, whose disapproval cuts far deeper than any stranger's insult ever could. The Stoics had a concept for this, sometimes translated as the inner citadel, the fortified, protected core of your mind and character, that no external force, no matter how close to you, is permitted to breach without your consent. Think of it as the innermost keep of a castle. Outer walls can be stormed, outer villages can burn, but the citadel itself remains by design, unconquerable, as long as you defend it properly. Here's the crucial insight for dealing with provocation from people close to you. Proximity and history do not grant someone automatic rights to your inner peace. A parent, a sibling, a partner, an old friend. The emotional weight of your history with them can make you feel obligated to absorb their provocations differently than you would from a stranger. But the same principle from Rule 1 still applies. Their words are still their package. Your peace is still your house. The relationship changes the context, but it does not change the fundamental mechanics of who owns what. In fact, provocation from people close to you often works precisely because it exploits old wounds. A parent who knows exactly which insecurity to poke, a sibling who's been competing with you since childhood, a partner who knows your specific fears well enough to weaponize them in an argument. This is where the inner citadel becomes essential, because the temptation to let someone in simply because they're family, simply because you love them, simply because you've known them for 20 years, is enormous. Marcus Aurelius dealt with this on an almost unimaginable scale. His own adopted family, the very people meant to secure his succession and support his rule, were sources of betrayal and political maneuvering throughout much of his life. And yet his writings show a man determined to maintain his own internal governance regardless of who was doing the provoking, emperor, general, or his own relatives. Here's a practical way to apply this rule. When provocation comes from someone close to you, ask yourself a modified version of the earlier question. Am I reacting to what they actually said, or to 20 years of accumulated history I'm projecting onto this single moment? Often, what feels like an unbearable provocation from a family member is actually this single comment plus a decade of unresolved resentment stacked on top of it. Separating the current moment from the historical weight allows you to respond to what's actually happening rather than to the entire emotional archive you're carrying. There's also a specific danger with people close to us that's worth naming directly. The fear that setting a boundary means losing the relationship. This fear can make people abandon the inner citadel entirely, allowing repeated provocation because the alternative, conflict, distance, an uncomfortable conversation, feels scarier than continued pain. But here's the Stoic reframe. Guarding your inner citadel isn't about pushing people away. It's about ensuring that your peace, your sense of self, your basic dignity remain intact regardless of who you're in relationship with. A relationship that requires you to surrender your inner citadel entirely isn't one. Built on genuine respect, no matter how much love exists alongside the dysfunction. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius about choosing companions carefully, precisely because he understood that we absorb the character of those we spend the most time with. This isn't about cutting off everyone who's ever provoked you. That would be both impossible and a misunderstanding of the philosophy. It's about recognizing that closeness earns someone more patience and more grace from you, not unconditional access to disturb your inner peace whenever they choose. Practically, this means the same tools apply: the pause, the dichotomy of control, the recognition that cruelty often stems from someone's own unresolved pain, but applied with an added layer of compassion because you likely understand the history and context behind a loved one's behavior in ways you never could with a stranger. Understanding your mother's harsh words through the lens of her own difficult upbringing, for example, doesn't mean you accept mistreatment. It means you can address it from a place of clarity rather than raw, wounded reaction. This brings us to the seventh and final rule, the one Marcus Aurelius reportedly turned to as he faced the ultimate provocation any human being ever faces: his own mortality. Rule 7. Remember the shortness of it all. Here is the final rule, and it's the one that, once it truly settles into you, makes almost every other provocation in life seem impossibly small. The Stoics practiced something called memento mori. Remember that you will die. This sounds morbid on the surface, but it is, paradoxically, one of the most life-affirming practices in the entire philosophy. Marcus Aurelius, near the end of his life and reflecting on decades of rule, wrote extensively about how brief a human life truly is when measured against the vastness of time, how quickly reputations fade, how soon even the most celebrated names are forgotten, how the same fate awaits everyone, regardless of how loudly they lived or how bitterly they fought. Here's how this connects directly to provocation. When you're in the heat of an argument, when someone has said something cutting, when your pride is wounded and your mind is racing toward retaliation, ask yourself this question and ask it honestly. Will this matter in 5 years? Will it matter in 5 months? Sometimes, for genuinely significant betrayals, the answer might be yes, and that's worth acknowledging. Because not every hurt is trivial, but for the vast majority of daily provocations, the rude comment, the dismissive tone, the passive-aggressive remark, the stranger online who will forget you exist within the hour, the honest answer is almost always no. Think about the provocations that consumed you a year ago. Can you even remember most of them clearly? The person who cut you off in traffic, the colleague who took credit for your idea in a meeting 3 years back, the argument you had with a friend that felt world-ending at the time. Most of these have faded into nothing, not because they didn't matter in the moment, but because time has a way of correctly sorting what deserves your lasting attention from what was simply noise. Marcus Aurelius used this awareness not to become nihilistic or to stop caring about anything, but to calibrate his reactions correctly. If everything ends, every argument, every grudge, every provocation, every person involved, eventually including yourself, then the wisest use of the limited time you actually have is not spent nursing wounds from people who will be forgotten by history, and often forgotten by you personally within months. Instead, that limited time is best spent on what actually matters: your character, your relationships worth keeping, your peace of mind, the legacy of how you treated people rather than how people treated you. There's a specific mental exercise that flows from this rule, and it's remarkably powerful in the moment of provocation. When someone provokes you, silently picture this exact moment from a distance of many years. Imagine yourself decades from now, looking back on this specific interaction. From that distance, how much weight does it actually carry? For almost every provocation you'll face in your lifetime, the honest answer, viewed from that distant vantage point, is almost none. This isn't about dismissing your feelings or pretending pain doesn't exist in the present moment. It's about correctly weighing that pain against the true scale of your entire life. A single insult, held up against 60, 70, 80 years of existence, against everyone you'll ever love. Every achievement you'll ever have, every sunset you'll ever watch, is almost always, when honestly measured, a tiny, forgettable blip. The tragedy is that so many people give these blips the emotional weight of a life-altering catastrophe, spending days, weeks, sometimes years of their limited time on Earth replaying moments that, from any wider vantage point, simply do not deserve that much of their finite attention. Seneca wrote something remarkable on this exact theme, that it isn't that we have a short time to live, but that we waste so much of it. Provocation, unmanaged, is one of the greatest thieves of a well-lived life. Every hour spent raging internally at someone who has already forgotten the interaction, every day spent nursing a grudge against someone whose opinion, ultimately, does not determine your worth. These are hours and days you will never get back, spent in service of someone else's momentary cruelty rather than your own flourishing. This is the final rule, and in many ways, it's the summary of everything we've discussed. When you truly internalize how limited and precious your time is, provocation loses its grip almost automatically. Not because you stop feeling things, but because you correctly recognize in real time what deserves your emotional investment and what simply doesn't. Let's bring all 7 rules together, because when you combine them, something remarkable happens. You stop being a puppet for other people's chaos and start becoming the calm, steady center that other people are drawn toward rather than able to destabilize. Rule 1 taught you to separate what is yours from what is theirs. Their words are their package, and you decide what crosses your threshold. Rule 2 taught you to rehearse difficult moments before they arrive, so shock never has the chance to destabilize you. Rule 3 taught you to starve the replay, refusing to hurt yourself over and over on behalf of someone who's already moved on. Rule 4 taught you to see cruelty as a symptom of someone else's internal struggle, rather than an accurate verdict on your worth. Rule 5 gave you the single most practical tool in this entire video, the 3-breath pause that denies provocateurs the reaction they're hunting for. Rule 6 taught you to guard your inner citadel, even from those closest to you, because love and history do not grant automatic rights to disturb your peace. And Rule 7 placed everything in its proper, humbling perspective, reminding you that almost nothing said to you in anger will matter against the true scale of your finite, precious life. None of these rules ask you to become cold, robotic, or emotionally numb. The Stoics were not advocating for a life without feeling. They were advocating for a life where you, not other people, decide what your feelings will be about. That's an enormous difference. A calm response isn't the absence of emotion. It's the mastery of it. Here's what I want you to take from this video more than anything else. The people who provoke you are, in a very real sense, testing whether they can still pull your strings. Every single time you respond with the wisdom in these 7 rules, with the pause instead of the outburst, with understanding instead of blind rage, with perspective instead of obsession, you are quietly proving, to yourself more than to anyone else, that those strings no longer exist. You have become, in the truest Stoic sense, ungovernable by anyone but yourself. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth, and yet his greatest victories, the ones he wrote about most fiercely in his own private journal, were never military. They were the daily, quiet battles to remain undisturbed, rational, and kind in the face of provocation that would have broken lesser men. If he could do it while commanding legions and burying his own children, you can absolutely do it the next time a co-worker is condescending, or a stranger online tries to bait you, or a family member says something they know will sting. If this video gave you even one tool you'll actually use, do 3 things for me right now. First, subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics, because we release videos exactly like this one, practical, deeply researched, built to actually change how you move through the world, multiple times a week. Second, share this with the one person in your life you know is currently dealing with someone difficult. This video might genuinely change how they handle it. And third, leave a comment telling me one provocation from your past that you're finally ready to let go of. Now that you understand it was never really about you at all. Until next time, stay calm, stay grounded, and remember, no one gets to write your reaction but you.